Good day, everyone. David Gumpper here from the WAV Group, bringing you September 2020's edition of Insightful Tech. Today we have two topics we're going to discuss based out of some news coming out of the technology world in two areas. The first is the new upgrade of WordPress 5.5 being launched and is available. We'll focus on some of the features that are in that WordPress core update, as well as there's a few gotchas too that we're gonna go through. The second piece of news is going to be talking about ADA, or American Disabilities Act compliance, and what does that mean from websites. And there is some news coming out of the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, in regards to those guidelines. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But first, let's take a healthy look at the new version of WordPress, and that is WordPress 5.5. If you all know WordPress, anytime they have a major or a .x minor update, they honor the great jazz legends. In this version, they're honoring the late great Billy Eckstine. If you have not heard of Billy Eckstine before, check him out on YouTube. Billy was a great jazz singer, and not only a great jazz singer, but he was a great jazz musician and band leader. But Billy's voice was the crooner voice for jazz going back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. His baritone voice was so smooth, and he had a natural vibrato to it that was just would melt your heart away. So if you get a chance, definitely check out Billy. And again, thanks to Automatic and the team for honoring Billy with WordPress 5.5. But let's kind of talk about 5.5. What are some of the new features about 5.5 that are part of this core that are important to us? So let me move my mouse over to here, and some of the first things we're going to talk about is speed. WordPress is following suit along with Google. Everybody knows that Google is kind of mandated throughout the industry that speed is very important. And when we say speed, it means how fast does your page load. We kind of want to see as an industry that your pages are loading underneath 2 seconds. But there's games you can play with that in order to obtain that type of number. And that's what WordPress actually put into its core for this release. And what they did was they used a technique called lazy loaded images. And what does that mean is that when a page loads, any images that are in view on the display will load up. It will download and load up automatically. But if you have more content below the screen that's not viewable, that content, those images will not load automatically. It will sit there waiting so that as you're scrolling, it will now begin to load up. And what does that do is that it allows the page on its first view be able to load only the content and the images that need to be seen at that moment. And then as you scroll down, it lazy loads those images into the background and displays it. And it kind of looks like a fading type of effect. There's been other plugins and tools out in the web, jQuery libraries and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit about the gotcha of jQuery here, but that had allowed websites to do that for a long time. It's just great to see that WordPress has put it into the core. And the reason why is it's just one less piece of JavaScript or jQuery or plugin that you're loading into your website that has to load up when that page loads, because that's what you want to have, is minimum amount of code loading up as possible. Another topic that WordPress really focused on in this version, this new release, is search. And what they did was, how can we make it real easy for search engines to find the content on our website, to know what that content is, to know when it's been updated, when it's new. or is it been archived? And that is all done through a technique called XML sitemaps. And what that is, it's literally a file that's on your website that the search engine bots go looking for, that literally contains all the pages of your site. And that's how it gets indexed into the search engines. And what WordPress has done is they've actually kind of optimized it and tried to make it better so it is easier for those search bots to find the content and so forth. But word of caution on here, if you are using the Yoast SEO plugin for your SEO purposes for your website, for your WordPress site, they did come out and say that their XML sitemap is more optimized than this latest version. So that's kind of interesting to see. If you are using the Yoast SEO plugin, I probably would recommend to keep using it. Matter of fact, I'm doing that right now with a majority of my websites because that's what I use. I like a lot of the features, and I even have the Pro version, which is, a yearly fee to have it, the Pro version, but it's worth it with the features and functionality that you get from it. Another topic that WordPress really kind of focused on was the challenges of having auto updates for plugins and themes. And where that challenge comes in is there's been an auto update feature for plugins and themes, and WordPress said, look, when a plugin goes rogue, in other words, it's been compromised of some sort, or it has bad code that a developer hasn't fixed in a long time or has no plans of fixing, right? To do auto updates on that plugin, it means that it could be auto updating with some malicious code or some bad code or code that will break your site. And so what WordPress has done is said, hey, look, we're going to kind of monitor these plugins, and we're going to prevent them from auto updating if we see fit. So I think that's a good strategy to take so that these auto updates don't happen on a regular basis. You should not auto update a lot of your plugins, only because a certain number of them deal with how websites are presented and some of the look and feel and navigational capabilities. What happens is those plugins will auto update and it will break your site. I'm a firm believer of having a staging site, which is a replica of your production site, and I always do my updates on that staging site first, just to see and test to make sure that everything is copacetic. And you wouldn't be surprised how many times you find they're not copacetic, that there's problems, and then you have to contact the plugin developer, and usually they come with a fix, or you just hold off on updating that plugin until when a fix arrives. So something that was really cool that from a security standpoint that WordPress was focusing on. Another big feature update on WordPress 5.5 is in the content management system pieces of it. In other words, how do I create my content? And you do that in WordPress now with what's called a block editor. And that block editor allows you to build very beautiful layouts of your content and images and how you structure it on a page. And that block editor needed some major overhauling and enhancements to it to make it easier to build that content, to make it flow, to make it work properly. So that was kind of interesting, and it was great. Some great things have come out of that. And then the last thing that, well, not the last thing, but the next to last is WordPress has also taken a very much interest to make sure that the core code of the content management system is accessible. In other words, it is inside the core, they will be able to validate that accessibility tools are able to read the content and so forth. But I do have a warning for you here. Just because WordPress core is accessible doesn't mean the plugins that you install, the themes that are installed on top of that are accessible. As a matter of fact, I will tell you a majority of them are not accessible. And I would be very leery if I would think that they were all accessible, even if they told me they were accessible. I have found that these themes and plugins are, there are challenges with them that should be addressed. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but it's important to realize that even as you update that site on a month-to-month basis, you have to constantly check for accessibility and for compliance. It's the only way that you can ensure that when you get one of those non-compliant defense letters, and enough of those letters have gone out lately, especially in Florida, and not just to brokerages, by the way. They've gone out to agents and agent websites. So just be aware that this is a monthly thing that you should be doing, and making sure that every page, every image, every piece of content is accessible to people with disabilities. But it's great to see that WordPress has taken a big step in doing the right things to make sure that the core of WordPress is accessible. The last topic that we'll talk about, and is just real quick because it's mostly for developers, the API for your WordPress website has been updated. Oh, you didn't know there was an API for WordPress, your website? Yeah, there is. And it's kind of really cool, but they have enhanced it with the new WordPress 5.5 version. But just to kind of give you an example of how you could use the WordPress REST API, is you could be publishing all your blog articles and content and research papers, and geez, you could even, from a real estate perspective, publish your homes, your neighborhoods, and so forth. And you could build a mobile app, and guess where you would feed the content from your mobile app? From your WordPress site. So, and matter of fact, that's what the WAV Group has done. We do all our publishing of all our articles and white papers and so forth, research papers, on wavegroup.com, so that you can all see it on the web with a browser, right? Well, we built a mobile app, and that mobile app does exactly this. It uses the REST API in our WordPress site to pull that content. And then we also have push notifications. So whenever we publish a new article, there's a push notification that goes out to the mobile app, and informs the person with that mobile app and their mobile phone that they have a new article from the WAV Group. So it's kind of some cool things. We built that a while ago, and would love to help anybody else that would want to do the same thing. So it's pretty cool. So let's talk about this gotcha that has happened. And there's been some news about this today as well too. But let's talk about what is going on. First of all, with websites, just regular code for HTML and CSS is pretty vanilla. You can't do a lot of things. Though today, CSS, you're starting to be able to do a lot more with the newer versions. But in the past, years ago, just to create a data field to enter and type in, and have data input warnings if the right data wasn't being put in, or buttons, auto animating a button so that when you hover over it, it changes colors, or when you click on it, it performs an action. Any type of animation or color schemes on your website, the presentation part of your website has always been handled by a library of tools for developers to use, and it's called jQuery. And inside that jQuery is a library. And with WordPress, the WordPress core itself, it's outdated. It's they haven't updated it since 2016. So they're taking all the steps right now to create a roadmap to update the jQuery on WordPress core. But the first step was to remove this piece of software called jQuery Migrate, which helped kind of like an intermediary between the jQuery library and a lot of the plugins that were using the old tools to be able to communicate. They removed it out of the 5.5. And when they removed it out of the 5.5 core, they created a plugin that you could go and download to your website. I had several sites that I don't know what happened. I do know what happened. The hosting provider did an automatic update. There's the auto update, right? And it broke their website because their plugins that they were using needed that jQuery migrate in order to perform right. Something simple as drop downs in the top menu navigation, right? So it was kind of interesting to see how downloading this new enabled jQuery plugin, a migrate plugin, that this website was function again. But I was lucky. Unfortunately, just doing this process, and even with that download of that enabled jQuery migrate plugin, millions of websites have encountered a barrage of issues and challenges with their website not working because of the plugins are not up to date. They're using old technology. They haven't been maintained. That happens a lot in the WordPress world, especially if you're using a plugin that you put on your site 10 years ago. And that's not, I mean, I've had WordPress since 2007, 2008. So 10 years old WordPress sites are not uncommon today. But in order to do this upgrade, you probably have some plugins that are not compatible, and apparently millions and millions of websites were broken. So today, Automatic had shipped a new version of WordPress 5.5.1, to rectify a lot of those problems. So the word's out still on whether this will help those millions of websites. Supposedly it has so far from what I've read, but just be cautious. Again, this is where testing is always good. You should have a test environment of your WordPress site so that you can do these upgrades and not impact your production or not impact your customers who are viewing your website. I do this with all my sites. I have what's called a staging and a development environments for them for the most part, but at least a staging environment. And that's where I do all my testing in to make sure that these plugins, I find out that if they're going to break before I install them. So that's a key thing. But so that's what's going on in the world of WordPress. So let's do this. Let's kind of focus over to our next topic, which is about we are going to talk about ADA, right? So yeah, American Disabilities Act and Section 508, and that is all governed by the Fair Housing. It's World Wide Web Consortium put out a standard for web content accessibility guidelines. And who is the W3C? W3C is a standards organization, just like we have the RESO, a real estate standards organization, on how data, MLS data, listing data, agent data, office data is transported from one system to another system, and how it can communicate, what that structure of those, I call them, fancy Excel spreadsheets with the same column names, right? So that the data flows seamlessly from one system to another system, right? Especially through APIs. But the RESO sets those standards so that we are able to do that as an industry, to streamline it, to be more efficient, be more effective. In the mid-1990s, late 1990s, W3C was organized because browsers were coming up with their own standards on how to present this the content on websites to people, and that the W3C essentially created standards to ensure that any content that is viewable through any browser kind of looks the same, reads the same, and so forth. That's why your Firefox, Safari, Microsoft Edge, Chrome, and Brave, and Opera, and other browsers out there are able to go to a web server, pull up the content, and you're able to read it. It's because of these standards. But W3C also got into the accessibility arena, and just to set up a standard guideline on how websites can be accessed by people with disabilities. And that's where the web content accessibility guidelines have come from, or the WCAG. Right now, we are at version 2.1, and what you're seeing on your screen right now is that it's 2.2. What has happened is on August 11th, WCG put out to the public a working draft. What does this mean? Well, it means that all the volunteers at W3C have gotten together and said, look, the 2.1 was great for the WCAG, but there's still more enhancements. And by the way, technology has improved since those guidelines were adopted and ratified, right? It's time to upgrade it. Let's make sure that the content that is viewable out on the web is accessible by people with disabilities. And they got together, they created this working draft. Now, as of August 11th, this working draft is available for public comment. And that's very important because it's important to get that public feedback. It's kind of like the beta group and said, okay, we thought about all these things that we should really enhance in the guidelines. Now, what do you think? What did we miss? What should be better? How can it be better defined? So what this does is this working draft will be open for public comment for some time, and then eventually it will get closed, and the team will get back together of all the volunteers through W3C and the people who are on the WCAG work group, and they will start to formulate a final version. And why is this really important? Because the WCAG 2.1 is pretty much the model guideline that the courts have been using to litigate these cases where people with disabilities are coming against major companies and corporations that their website's not compliant. Things like Domino's. All right, Domino's just earlier this year had a case awarded against it, and it wasn't even their website. It was a third-party widget on their website to finish off the buying process of purchasing that was not compliant in that third-party website, and Domino's was saying it wasn't my fault, wasn't my problem. Well, reality it is because they came from your site and you were sending, in order for them to complete a process, to complete a step in order to perform, to get a service or a product from you, you sent them off to a site that wasn't compliant. They have to be compliant, and everybody downstream has to be compliant as well too. So, but what I want to do is just kind of go through a few things on this new working draft that just was released. And I have a few things that I want to kind of show everyone where they highlight the main right here. These are the main success criteria. That's what they're called today. These are guidelines by adding new success criteria and also to define what those success criterions are. So some of the new things that have come out, all of these are, there's only one that's a level A, and then there's one that's level 3, and then all the others here are level 2. And why that is important, because right now, again, the courts are using WCAG 2.1 level 2 as its guideline for litigation purposes. So, and when you are level 2, that means you surpass level 1. Level 1's the lowest, level 2 is medium, level 3 is the best. All right, but level 2 is the minimum requirement as of right now. That could change at any time, so be cognizant of that. But some of the things that was success criteria was dragging. When we take a look at dragging, what does that mean? Well, it means that in this new success criteria that they put out, that it was very important that an operation can be done through a single pointer while dragging, unless the dragging was essential. But when you drag elements around, for instance, to sort with, you have to be able to do it with a single device. In other words, you can't do a control drag or a command drag on a Mac and so forth. So it's kind of important to do that. The focus appearance, the minimum, that's a level 2. What does that mean? That's really to enable keyboard navigation capabilities. And what it is it has to look a certain way in order to be able to, so that the user can be able to see where they are as they're navigating using their keyboard. So there's some new success criteria that's behind that. And there's a minimum and maximum to that as well. The other important one is, the target spacing. I thought that was very interesting because actually but Android, Google Android, and Apple iOS, they kind of have default standards on mobile devices of what the minimum size of buttons need to be, or anything that has to deal with somebody interacting with the screen. Well, they've kind of put this together for what does it mean for the web and the web browsers, and how does that work with accessibility tools in regards to that navigation. So there is some new success criteria with the minimum height and width of pixels, and around what that target spacing needs to be. So just be aware of that. Let's see, what else? What is the accessible authentication? That one is a very important one. It's number 1 up here. I had it down on my list here. Shame on me. But accessible authentication. So what is that? There's new success criteria based upon how that process is to allow a person with disabilities to go through the process of getting access or having authentication to access to certain content. What does that mean? So I know all real estate websites and most of MLS public facing websites, customers are able to create an account on those sites, right? And because they're able to create those accounts on those sites, you better make sure that you meet this new success criteria for accessible authentication. So just look at that and pay attention. But the good news is that these are just working drafts right now. Plan on them being revised over the course of time. What I am hearing from my reading and talking to people on the WCAG work group is that, we probably will not see a final draft for ratification and approval and ratification until probably second quarter of 2021. So kind of think of, early spring to early summer time frame. Probably more just early summer time frame. I would suspect around June 30th or the July 1st, around that time frame. So figure about end of second quarter on 2021 that the final draft. But your takeaway from this is you better be 2.1 compliant right now. And this is not one of those items that you can say, hey, look, I've done my assessment, ADA assessment on my website. We passed, or, oh, by the way, we passed and we fixed it and we're done. No, this is something that you have to do on a monthly basis. You have to constantly audit your website to ensure that the content that's in there is readable and available to accessibility tools for compliance to ADA. So just remember that and look at that. If you have any questions, get a hold of Marilyn and I. We have some news coming up in the future that I think will be exciting and maybe some relief for most folks in a real estate business, not only just with brokerages and agents, but with MLSs and associations. We're looking to really get involved more with ADA because it's the right thing to do. We are very adamant that this is one area where we all could do better, and why not? Let's do it together. All right. So hey, look, it's been great to have you around and listen to me jabber here. Don't call me Jabberjaws, please. No. But thank you very much for listening. And until the next time, be safe and be better. Take care and have a great day. Bye.